For 43 years, two brothers lived in a place where no sunlight had ever touched their skin, a place so silent that even their own shadows felt like strangers. But when the truth finally came out, it wasn't the darkness that shocked the world, it was the reason they were put there. Truth, once revealed, didn't just free the brothers, it exposed a secret the entire town had helped protect. The house at the edge of Greybridge Forest had always been an unsettling sight, even before anyone knew what secrets lay beneath its rotting floorboards. Locals said it felt wrong somehow, like a place frozen in time, abandoned by sunlight itself. The windows were covered from the inside with thick sheets of metal, rusting at the corners. The wooden beams sagged as if decades of silence had finally broken their spirit. The front gate creaked whenever the wind touched it, even with no one around. Children growing up in Greybridge told stories they didn't understand but repeated anyway. Ghosts live there. No, missing people are buried in the backyard. My uncle says a madman once lived inside, but no one knew the truth. Not yet. In the fall of 2017, when the skies over Greybridge turned orange with smoke from the rapidly spreading forest fire, the forgotten house finally opened its mouth and revealed the whisper it had held for 43 years. Firefighters had been moving door to door, urging residents to leave their homes before the wildfire reached the last row of houses near the forest. The old Harrington house stood at the farthest point, surrounded by dead trees that looked like blackened claws stretching toward the sky. The fire chief, Officer Grant, approached the house reluctantly. He'd always disliked this place but knew the flames didn't care about fears or legends. Place looks abandoned, one of the younger firefighters muttered as they approached. Maybe, Grant said, but we check anyway. They knocked first out of habit, even though it was obvious no one lived there. The paint on the door was peeling, the frame leaned slightly to the left, and still, no response. Grant gripped the doorknob and tried to twist, locked. Then another firefighter, Samuels, shined his flashlight through the sliver between the boards covering the window. Sir, I see movement. Grant's heart skipped. Probably an animal, he told himself, or smoke shifting. But when he looked closer, he too sensed something faint, like a shadow flinching away from the beam of light. They didn't have minutes to waste. Flames were approaching from the north side of the forest, so they broke the lock. The door fell open with a groan, releasing a wave of stale, suffocating air that made the men step back. It smelled like the earth itself had died inside this house. Dust swirled in the flashlight beams like tiny spirits disturbed after decades of rest. They swept the main room empty, the kitchen empty, bedrooms empty except for crumbling furniture covered in sheets. Everything looked untouched for decades. It seemed like whoever lived here left suddenly, or never returned. The firefighters were ready to leave until Officer Grant noticed something strange. In the living room, under a mold-eaten rug, the floorboards didn't match the rest. These had a slightly different grain, newer nails, and beside them small scratches as if something had scraped from underneath. Samuels knelt and ran his hands across the boards. "There's something under here," he whispered. Grant nodded. "Pull it up." They pried up the wood, expecting maybe a crawl space or old storage. But when the last plank lifted, what they saw made every man step back instinctively. A metal hatch, thick, bolted with a padlock that looked recently oiled. Someone was using this, Samuel said. His voice was shaking. Grant signaled everyone to stand back. With one swift motion, he struck the lock with the butt of his axe. It snapped open. He pulled the hatch up slowly, bracing for anything: fumes, fire, wild animals. But what rose instead was the coldest, deepest darkness any of them had ever seen. A stairway disappeared into it, wooden and narrow, each step worn down by time. A smell wafted up: damp earth, old blankets, something almost metallic, and then they heard it, a sound so soft they thought they imagined it, a breath, another, then a whisper: "Please, don't hurt us." Flashlights shook slightly as the firefighters aimed them downward. Their boots thudded one by one as they descended into the cellar, and then, in the farthest corner of the underground room, they saw two figures huddled against the wall. At first, they looked like ghosts, thin, impossibly pale beings with sunken cheeks and hair that fell in uneven strands around their faces. Blankets wrapped around their skeletal frames. Their eyes reflected the flashlight beams like frightened animals. "Sir, they're people," Samuels breathed, barely able to comprehend it. The older of the two men raised a trembling hand to shield his face from the light. "Please, not the bright lamps, please." He spoke as if the words had been locked away for years, scraping against his throat like rusted metal. Grant stepped forward slowly, holding out his hand. "It's okay, you're safe, we're firefighters, we're here to help." The younger brother clung to the older one's arm. They both looked terrified, confused, overwhelmed. The men gently lowered their flashlights. It didn't help much. The brothers still squinted, blinking rapidly, as if their eyes had not seen light in a lifetime. "Can you tell me your names?" Grant asked. The older brother swallowed hard. "Elias. And you?" The younger man hesitated, then whispered, "Jonah." Their voices sounded unused, like old instruments that had been silent for decades. Grant crouched beside them. "How long have you been down here?" Elias looked at him with an expression that was impossible to forget, a mixture of fear, shame, and exhaustion beyond measure. We don't know the year." Jonah whispered, "Father said we couldn't go outside. He said the sickness was still out there." Grant felt a chill run down his spine. "Sickness? What sickness?" Samuels looked around the cellar. There were empty jars, a thin mattress, a broken radio, stacks of old books, and a small lantern that had burned out long ago. A calendar pinned to the wall showed the year 1974 with the months scribbled out after June. Elias suddenly clutched Jonah's hand, his voice trembling. "Is it safe now? Did the sickness take the world?" Grant's breath caught. The pieces clicked. "Elias, Jonah, what year do you think it is?" Both brothers stared at him, terrified to answer. "We think it must still be 1970 something," Jonah whispered. Grant exhaled slowly. "It's not. It's 2017. Silence sank over the cellar like a heavy stone. Elias closed his eyes, tears slipping down his cheeks. Jonah shook his head repeatedly, traumatized. They clung to each other, their entire world collapsing in a moment. 43 years had passed outside. Their childhood, their youth, their adulthood, all swallowed by that room. Carrying the brothers up the stairs felt like lifting feathers. Their bodies were delicate, their muscles weak, and their limbs trembling from the simple act of standing. When they reached the open doorway, both of them stopped as if struck by an invisible force. Sunlight, real sunlight. The sky beyond was smoky from the fire, yet still brighter than anything they had seen in decades. They cried out, covering their faces, falling back in fear. The firefighters shielded the brothers with jackets, guiding them slowly into the shade of the fire truck. "It's okay," Grant repeated softly. "That's the sun. It won't hurt you." But for Elias and Jonah, the sun looked like a burning monster, too large, too bright, too powerful. It was like being reborn into a world that didn't feel real. As they were driven to the emergency shelter, the brothers sat together in the back of the ambulance, whispering questions the paramedics struggled to answer. What happened to the world? Did everyone die? Did the sickness get Mother? Is Father coming back? They clung to each other with the desperation of two boys rather than two grown men. Fear had frozen them in time. They had no understanding of life beyond that cellar. When they arrived at the medical tent set up for fire evacuees, the doctors were just as stunned. Elias and Jonah were severely malnourished, but somehow still alive. Their skin had almost no pigmentation left. Their eyes were painfully sensitive to even dim light. Their hair and nails had grown wildly. The doctors' voices trembled as they documented every detail. One nurse asked gently, "Do you know how long you lived underground?" Elias whispered, "We only had Father's stories. He kept the calendars. He told us the world was gone." The nurse's voice broke. "Your father, he kept you locked below." Jonah shook his head. "No, he was saving us, the sickness. He said it was everywhere." The doctors exchanged silent glances. They had seen trauma, but never like this. Late that night, the brothers lay in hospital beds with soft sheets and warm lights, yet they kept flinching each time a nurse entered. Every beep of a machine made them sit up in shock. Every passing whisper made them cover their ears. The world felt loud, strange, terrifying. Jonah stared out the window at the moon, blinking at its pale glow. "What is that light?" he asked Elias softly. Elias took a shaky breath. I think that's the moon. I remember it from when we were very little." "Father said it was dangerous to look at the sky," Jonah murmured. Elias didn't answer. He simply reached for his brother's hand, the same way he had done when they were children hiding from storms, the same way he had done for 43 years in the dark. Investigators arrived the next morning. They wanted to know everything: how the brothers survived, why no one noticed they were missing, what happened to their father. But Elias could only tell fragments. Jonah could only whisper memories. All they remembered clearly was fear. "Father said the air outside would kill us," Elias explained. "He said people had changed, that they hurt children." Jonah nodded. "He said if we ever left, we'd die like Mother." The investigators pieced together that Samuel Harrington had secluded himself from society after the sudden death of his wife, Clara. Something inside him broke. And out of that brokenness, he constructed an entire false world for his sons. He didn't beat them. He didn't starve them. He didn't hate them. He truly believed he was protecting them. But protection built on fear becomes a prison. News spread quickly across Graybridge. People were shocked, horrified, but also ashamed. The Harrington family had been known, respected. After Clara died, Samuel isolated himself. Children were no longer seen. And the town, choosing convenience over curiosity, assumed they had simply moved away. No one checked, no one knocked, no one asked where the boys had gone. Graybridge had chosen silence, and two brothers paid for it. The story of Elias and Jonah did not begin in the darkness where they were found, nor in the cellar that swallowed 43 years of their lives. It began in the warm, sun-lit home they once knew, a place filled with laughter, music, and a mother whose voice made everything feel safe. Before the house at Graybridge became a tomb of shadows, it had been a home. And before Samuel Harrington became a man consumed by delusions, he had been a loving husband and father, respected by everyone in town. Understanding how the brothers vanished meant going back to the year 1974, back to the moment the first crack appeared in a life that had once been ordinary. Elias was 8 then, Jonah 5. They remembered the brightness of their childhood like a distant dream, soft, blurry, but painful in its beauty. Their mother, Clara, would bake bread in the mornings, humming old folk songs while flour dusted her cheeks. Their father would return from the school where he taught history, tired but smiling, always eager to join his sons in their games. Their home smelled of lavender and wood polish. The windows were open, curtains fluttering gently in the summer breeze. Everything felt alive. Then Clara got sick. It started with a cough, light, harmless. Within a week she was bedridden. Doctors said it was a severe respiratory infection, but in that era, rural towns lacked advanced medical support. Clara weakened, her voice faded. Elias remembered holding her hand on the last night, feeling her warmth slowly disappear. Jonah didn't understand what death meant, only that his mother stopped waking up. When Clara was buried, something inside Samuel Harrington cracked, like a mirror splitting silently down the middle. He stood by the casket, eyes hollow, unmoving except for the tremor that ran through his hands. People whispered they had never seen a man so broken, but grief is unpredictable. It bends some people, it destroys others. Elias and Jonah lost a mother. Samuel lost his reason. After Clara's death, Samuel's changes were subtle at first. Little things people dismissed as grief. He stopped attending church. He skipped school for a week, then 2. He walked with his shoulders hunched, avoiding eye contact, as if ashamed of something no one could name. He began speaking anxiously about a sickness that he believed killed his wife. Doctors insisted Clara's illness wasn't contagious, but Samuel refused to accept it. He spent hours researching epidemics in old library books, searching for patterns, evidence, warnings. He became convinced that the world outside was on the brink of collapse. Neighbors offered comfort, friends left food at his door, but Samuel avoided everyone. The windows of the once bright house were now shut tight, curtains drawn, doors locked. The Harrington home, once a place of warmth, now looked like a wounded animal retreating into a corner. Inside, Samuel clung to his sons with a desperation that frightened them. "Elias, Jonah, I won't lose you too." He would whisper at night. His hands trembled as he held them. There are dangers out there. The sickness is spreading. People are hiding it. Elias, barely 9, didn't understand. Jonah, always trusting, believed every word. The fear grew like a toxin in Samuel's mind, and slowly fear became obsession. The turning point came 6 months after Clara's death, the day Samuel locked the back door and nailed the windows shut. He told the boys it was precaution. Next, he began rationing food to keep them healthy. He took their outdoor clothes away. He burned old newspapers, saying they carried germs. The boys cried when he tore down their drawings of the sky and threw away anything that reminded them of the outside world. One night, he gathered Elias and Jonah in the living room, his eyes red from lack of sleep. "You must listen to me," he said, voice cracking. "The world outside is no longer safe. The sickness that took your mother, it's everywhere now." Elias flinched. Jonah clung to his stuffed rabbit. Samuel continued pacing. "People won't tell you. They'll pretend everything is fine, but it's not. You cannot trust anyone except me. I am the only one who can protect you." The boys exchanged frightened glances. Their father had always been gentle, rational. But now there was something wild behind his eyes, something desperate. "From now on," Samuel said softly, "we stay inside. We stay together." And so began the lie that stole their entire lives. Samuel's paranoia grew into a horrifying certainty. The only safe place was underground. He began constructing a basement room, telling the boys it was a storm shelter. But the room he built, deep, windowless, reinforced with metal and concrete, was far more than a shelter. It was a prison disguised as safety. Elias remembered watching their father work late into the night, hammering boards with trembling hands. Jonah remembered how the air smelled like dust and fear. The boys didn't understand why their father paced every night, listening to distant sounds only he could hear. By winter, the room was finished, shelves stocked with canned food, blankets, lanterns, books. Samuel stood before the door, breathing heavily. "This," he said, "is your sanctuary." Neither child knew that this sanctuary would become their world for the next 4 decades. The final break happened on a stormy night. Lightning split the sky, thunder shook the house. Samuel woke Elias and Jonah, telling them the sickness had reached their town. "They're knocking on doors," he whispered urgently. "Taking people away, we must hide, quickly." The boys, terrified, obeyed. They followed him down into the cellar. The door closed, a chain rattled, a lock clicked, and the world above disappeared. For the first year underground, Samuel followed a routine as if clinging to the last shreds of sanity. Every morning he brought food. Every night he read them stories. He tried to teach lessons, maintaining the illusion of a normal life. But the cracks in his mind only widened. He told them the radio was their only connection to the outside world. But he controlled it, turning it on when he chose, adjusting the static to make it sound like emergency broadcasts. He would stare at the boys with a haunted look and whisper, "Hear that? City's burning, people dying, we're lucky we're safe." Elias, growing older, started questioning inconsistencies. "Why haven't we heard any voices, any news announcers?" Samuel tightened his grip on his son's hand. "Do you think I'd lie to you? Do you think your mother would want you out there?" Guilt was Samuel's final weapon. Jonah, younger and more fragile, never doubted their father. He believed the world was poisoned. He believed stepping outside meant death. Fear became their cage. Inside that dark room, the boys celebrated birthdays with stale crackers. They marked time with faint scratch marks on the wall. They read the same books repeatedly until the pages tore. They created imaginary worlds to fill the emptiness. Their minds grew, but their world never did. When Samuel descended into the cellar each night, his hair had grown grayer, his face more lined, his sanity thinner. But the boys didn't hate him, not yet. They believed he was keeping them alive. Love, twisted by fear, becomes chains. As the years passed, Samuel's visits grew shorter, his ramblings less coherent. Some nights he didn't come down at all. Elias began to realize something was wrong. "Father's sick." He whispered to Jonah, "He's not well." Jonah shook his head, refusing to believe it. "He'll come, he always comes." But then came the night he didn't. And the night after, and the night after that. Samuel Harrington died alone in his bed, overwhelmed by years of untreated mental illness. The boys waited for him, calling his name until their voices cracked. They rationed what food was left, but the door remained locked, the world above silent. Days bled into weeks. The boys grew thinner, weaker. At some point, Jonah collapsed in Elias's arms, sobbing. "I think we're going to die down here," he whispered. But fate or tragedy intervened. A wildfire swept through the forest 4 decades later. Firefighters broke open the house, and the lie Samuel built finally shattered. While investigators pieced together the brothers' story, the town of Graybridge faced a truth it had ignored for decades. They played a role too. Neighbors had noticed Samuel withdrawing. They had wondered why the boys were never seen. A few even asked questions, but only once, casually. No one followed up. People preferred not to intrude, preferred not to be uncomfortable, and silence, they discovered too late, can be crueler than violence. Dr. Evans, one of the psychologists assigned to the case, said something that stayed with everyone. Fear built the walls of that cellar, but silence kept them standing. The more authorities learned, the clearer the tragedy became. Samuel believed he was saving his sons. He believed the sickness that killed his wife would take them too. He believed the world outside was collapsing. In his journals, which investigators found stacked neatly beside his bed, he wrote, "If the world must think me mad, so be it. I will not lose them too. Better a life in darkness than a death in the light." Samuel didn't imprison his sons out of hatred, but out of a love corrupted beyond recognition. And even after his death, his lie lived on for over 12 years, until the wildfire forced truth to break the surface. As Elias and Jonah recovered in the hospital, their memories spilled out in fragments. "We didn't know what year it was. He told us the air was poison. He said people outside were infected. He said Mother wanted us to stay hidden. He told us we'd die if we tried to leave." The cruelty wasn't physical. The cruelty was psychological. A prison built with fear instead of bars, and the more they remembered, the more painful the truth became. They could have been free. They could have lived. They could have known sunlight, friends, love, work, life. But they were robbed by a lie created by a broken man and protected by a silent town. For 43 years, the world above had gone on spinning, seasons changing, people being born, growing, leaving, living, while underneath it all, in the forgotten corners of a town that pretended to know itself, 2 brothers lived in a silence so profound it sank into their bones. But on that morning, the morning that would split history into before and after, the silence began to crack. It started with a sound they had never heard before, not the creak of old wooden beams, not the drip of winter moisture slipping through the foundation stones, not the muted footsteps of the woman who had controlled the rhythm of their existence. This sound was different, a vibration, a rumble, a world waking. Jonah froze where he sat, his fingers still hovering above the stub of the pencil he used to scratch faint lines into the scraps of cardboard he collected. Beside him, Elias slowly lifted his head, blinking in surprise as dust rained from the low ceiling. What is that?" Elias whispered, his voice trembling. Jonah shook his head. "I don't know," but he knew one thing with bone, deep certainty: it wasn't normal. The brothers lived inside a basement so old it had forgotten it once belonged to a house built with hope. The boards above them were warped with time. The walls bowed slightly inward, as though the weight of the world they had never seen, pressed down on them daily. Their mother, Marlene, always said sunlight was poison to them, that people would take them away, that they were born sick, that the world outside didn't want them. Simple lies at first, then necessary lies. Then lies that became chains, but the rumbling deep and alien didn't fit into any story Marlene had ever fed them. Jonah stood, brushing dust off his shoulders. "Illy, I think something's happening." Before Elias could answer, the entire basement shivered as if struck from outside. A long crack split across the far wall, trailing powdered cement. The bare light bulb above them flickered wildly, and then a sound they recognized. Footsteps, not their mother's, heavier, faster, urgent. Elias's eyes widened. "Jonah, someone's here. Someone is in the house." For 2 brothers who had lived thinking the world consisted of 3 rooms and a woman who controlled their reality, footsteps were not just footsteps, they were the collapse of everything familiar. Jonah moved quickly to Elias's side, helping him stand. Years of weakness made Elias slower. He had always been the frailer of the 2. They waited, held breath, listened. More footsteps, voices. muffled but unmistakably multiple. And then a sudden, violent crash. Wood splintered, hinges screamed, light, real light, brighter than anything they'd known, leaked from the top of the basement stairs. Elias gasped and shielded his eyes instinctively, stumbling back. Jonah felt his heart slam into his ribs so hard he thought it might break free. Then a voice cut through the blinding glare. "Police, if anyone is down there, call out." Jonah's mouth went dry. Police. He had heard the word in the stories their mother told, always as a threat, always as monsters who would drag them away. But the voice above didn't sound monstrous, it sounded concerned. Elias clung to Jonah's sleeve. "Don't answer, don't," but Jonah stepped forward before fear could decide for him. "Hello," he called, voice cracking. "We're here." Instant silence, then several hurried footsteps, then the descending beam of a flashlight, bright, sharp, piercing. A man in a heavy coat appeared at the top of the stairs, his face shadowed by the glow behind him. "Are you two all right?" The officer asked breathlessly. Jonah swallowed hard. "We don't know." It was the truest thing he had ever said. The officer started down the steps slowly, as though afraid any sudden move might break them. Behind him, another figure followed, and another. Elias pressed himself into Jonah's side, trembling. "Jonah, what do? We go," Jonah said, though he wasn't sure why he believed that. Maybe because staying meant staying in lies. Maybe because a part of him had always known something was wrong, deeply, painfully wrong. When the officer reached the bottom, his eyes swept the room. The stained mattress they shared, the rusted sink, the boxes they used as shelves, the scratched drawings Jonah had made to imagine a world he'd never seen. The shock on the man's face was unmistakable. "Dear God," he whispered, "how long have you two been down here?" Jonah hesitated. Elias lowered his head. "We don't know," Jonah said softly. "A long time." The officer nodded as if confirming his worst fears. "We're getting you out." He held out a hand. Jonah stared at it, at the calloused palm, the unfamiliar gesture. No one had offered them anything in years. Elias squeezed Jonah's arm. "Jonah," he whispered, "Mom will be angry." Jonah closed his eyes, the words slicing him open. "No," he said, shaking his head slowly. "Mom lied." The officer stepped closer. "You're safe now, I promise." Jonah looked at Elias, who looked back at him with tears streaking down the dust on his cheeks. Then Jonah nodded, took the officer's hand, and helped Elias cling to his shirt as they started the climb. Each step felt like walking toward a truth he wasn't sure he was ready for. Halfway up, the light grew blinding, warm, and terrifying. Their skin tingled, their eyes watered, the air smelled. Different, not damp, not sour, fresh, alive. Elias whimpered. "It hurts." "I know," Jonah whispered, guiding him. "Don't look yet." And then they crossed the threshold. The moment they stepped into the living room, their world expanded violently, overwhelmingly, like lungs filling after years underwater. The room was larger than they imagined. The walls weren't as cracked as the basements. There were windows sealed with boards, thick and dark. Police had pried some loose already, and daylight streamed in through the gaps. Daylight, actual daylight. Elias stumbled again, shaking. "It's so bright." "It's okay," a woman's voice said gently. One of the officers approached, crouching close enough to offer comfort but not enough to frighten them. "Your eyes will adjust. You've been kept in darkness for a long time." Jonah nodded numbly. Elias clung tighter, burying his face. Behind them came more noise, more officers, more talking, the scraping of furniture being moved, radios crackling. Then, behind it all, a scream that punched Jonah straight in the chest. "No, no, you can't take them, Marlene." They turned their heads at the same time, like magnets pulled by old habits. Across the room, the front door stood open, and officers were restraining a thin, frantic woman, gray hair wild, eyes burning with something between grief and madness. Marlene struggled violently. "They're mine. I protected them. They're sick. They can't be outside. Let me go. Let me go." Elias trembled uncontrollably. "Jonah, she's angry." Jonah's throat tightened until he couldn't breathe. Seeing her like that, feral, terrified, unmasked, unraveled everything he'd ever believed. She didn't look like a protector. She didn't look like a savior. She looked like someone terrified of losing control. The female officer beside them whispered, "Don't look at her. You're safe now." But Jonah couldn't look away, not from the woman who had shaped their world, not from the lies that had shaped their lives. Marlene screamed as officers pulled her out of the house, her cries echoing through the walls. "They'll die out there. They don't know how to live. They need me." Her voice faded, swallowed by the daylight. Jonah felt something inside him break, but not in a painful way. It broke like a chain snapping clean. The house fell quiet except for the sounds of officers moving through the rooms. The female officer stood. "We're taking you outside. There are medics waiting and sunlight." She paused. "It will be overwhelming, but you'll be okay. You're going to start your lives today." "Start," Elias whispered. "We're too old to start." Jonah placed a hand on his brother's back. "We can start now, together." Elias lifted his head slowly. His eyes were still red, still adjusting, still fearful, but he nodded. The officers guided them to the front door. The boards covering the lower windows had been removed entirely. The light pooled across the floor in soft gold streaks. Jonah felt the warmth on his feet, then his legs, then his hands. Warmth, actual warmth. He inhaled sharply. The air smelled sweet grass, dew, sun, warm dirt. The air from the basement had always tasted like mold and regret. Elias clung to him, breathing unevenly. "It's okay," Jonah whispered softly. They stepped through the doorway and the world exploded. Color, sound, wind, trees, sky, the sky. A vast, endless blue infinity stretched overhead, dotted with drifting clouds that looked like floating cotton. Elias gasped as if stabbed. His legs gave out, and he sank to his knees, sobbing. Jonah dropped beside him, holding him close. The sunlight covered them both, painting their skin gold. "I didn't know." Elias choked out, tears spilling freely. "I didn't know it was so big." Jonah looked up through the blur of his own tears. He didn't know either. All his drawings, the imagined skies, the guessed-at colors had failed miserably at capturing the truth. The real sky was a miracle. "It's beautiful," Jonah whispered. A medic approached quietly. "You two take as long as you need." The brothers remained there on the porch, crying, breathing, seeing as though trying to drink in a world they had been starved of since childhood. After several minutes, Jonah helped Elias stand again. "We'll see everything," he promised. Elias nodded, wiping his eyes. "Everything, everything." They followed the medics to a waiting ambulance. Neighbors stood at a distance, whispering. Some cried. Some stared in disbelief, but none of that mattered, because as the brothers sat on the edge of the ambulance, wrapped in blankets though the sun was warm, both looked out at the world like newborns seeing creation for the first time. Elias spoke in a small but steady voice. "Jonah, are we free?" Jonah took his brother's hand, the same hand he had held in darkness for 4 decades. "Yes," he said, "we're free now." And for the first time in their lives, he wasn't saying it to convince himself. He was saying it because it was true. As the ambulance doors closed gently around them and the engine rumbled to life, the brothers kept their eyes fixed on the sky, letting the sunlight pour in through the windows. Not as a threat, not as a forbidden thing, but as a promise, a beginning, a life waiting to be lived. For brothers who had lived in darkness for 43 years, this wasn't the end of the story. It was the first day of a new one.